A killing, and according to the U.S. president, the worst ever cover-up. It's an alliance thrown into turmoil. Hello, I'm Adijan Ayandar, here outside the Washington Post headquarters. Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was a contributor here, and it was his strongest tie to the United States. Now, his killing has become the biggest test of the Saudi-U.S. relationship in years. It's a decades-long alliance that's been the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy and counterterrorism in the Middle East. Now, throughout this special program, we'll be going to different locations and talking to people at the heart of this story. But first, Sally Ayhan takes a look back at how we got here.
Erdogan, in front of his party's members inside Turkey's parliament, called Jamal Khashoggi's killing a political and savage murder. He also called on the Saudi authorities to extradite the suspects to Turkey.
This murder took place in the Saudi consulate, which is considered Saudi soil. However, it shouldn't be forgotten that this is within the borders of the Republic of Turkey. My request is that those 18 people linked to Khashoggi's murder should appear in Turkish courts.
He reiterated much of what is already known, but challenged Saudi Arabia with a set of questions.
Why did those 15 men with their specific qualifications with regard to this crime come to Istanbul? Who gave them their orders? Why was the consulate building open for investigation only days after and not immediately? Why have there been so many inconsistent explanations made when the murder was clear?
It's more ammunition for American lawmakers who want Trump to take action. While the White House sent the director of the CIA to Istanbul to help with the investigation, the president is still defending the value of America's alliance to Saudi Arabia.
I don't want to lose all of that investment that's being made in our country. I don't want to lose 1 million jobs. I don't want to lose $110 billion in terms of investment. But it's really $450 billion if you include other than military. So that's very important.
As the investigation develops in Istanbul and the surrounding areas, Saudi Arabian ministers are trying to salvage some of the kingdom's international reputation.
To see to it that the investigation is thorough and complete and that the truth is revealed and that those responsible will be held to account and that procedures and mechanisms are put in place to ensure that something like this can never happen again.
At a business conference in the Saudi capital Riyadh, boycotted by many, another minister talked about the political crisis.
Nobody in the kingdom can justify it or explain it. And from the leadership on down, we're very upset about what has happened. And of course, the king has made it clear that there will be investigation, justice, and retribution to those responsible.
For the family and fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi, the main questions now are, as they were on October the 2nd, who ordered the killing and where's the body? Sally Ayhan, TRT World.
We're here at the headquarters of CARE, that's the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Now, one of the reasons why Khashoggi's killing caused such an outrage here in Washington is that he was such a well-known figure. He had strong ties with media circles, and he had close friendships with many influencers of U.S. policies. One of those people is actually Nihat Awad. He's the executive director of CARE, and he joins us now. Nihat, a lot of the media is concentrating on the investigation and how do we move forward. But one thing that's often overlooked is what type of man he was. Tell us about Jamal.
Jamal Khashoggi was a unique individual. He was very gentle, very sociable. He always wanted to meet with people, learn from them. But also he was fond of, current events, whether in Saudi Arabia or in the Arab world or the Muslim world. And he wanted to speak and analyze. He loved America and he loved his country. He was extremely interested in always expanding his friendship with people and exchange information. I have known him for the past 25 years, and my relationship with him got strengthened when he came back to the US and settled here in Northern Virginia. He had no family members, so I and other friends became his family. But he always told me that he had no choice but to continue to speak out and speak for those who have been silenced and who have been thrown in jail, especially common friends and scholars and journalists and human rights and women's rights activists.
Nihat is one of his closest friends here in the United States. You were in constant touch with him. Did you feel that he was apprehensive about visiting Saudi embassies and consulates?
He was apprehensive. I remember one time when he entered the Saudi embassy here in Washington, D.C., he told me that as soon as he entered the embassy to take care of some paperwork, that they informed the ambassador, and the ambassador met him immediately. He told me that they monitor his movement, and they wanted to stay in touch with him, obviously to influence his views. He was apprehensive, but not to the level that he would be harmed by them.
Saudi diplomatic missions like this one have been thrust into the spotlight since October the 2nd, when Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and was never seen again outside its walls. TRT World has been there around the clock and has the latest from Istanbul.
The Turkish investigators are continuing their probe of this murder. Now, the Saudis are saying that they are cooperating in the investigation. The Saudi king has talked to President Erdogan and has offered all assurances of cooperation from his side. He's also constituted a ministerial committee to investigate this matter and also to restructure the Saudi intelligence. But the Turkish side is saying that this committee is being headed by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and he is a person of interest for Turkey because a number of suspects that have been identified by Turkey are known to be very close to the Saudi Crown Prince. So Ankara is saying that it's important that Riyadh does not just make claims, but it has to take the measures to offer assurances to Turkey that it is cooperating. Now, President Erdogan has said that those responsible should be extradited to Turkey and they should be prosecuted here. The Saudi side is yet to respond to this request.
A democracy by the people, for the people, and a tightly controlled monarchy have never made for a natural alliance. Yet the United States and Saudi Arabia have depended on one another to carry out their interests in the Middle East. TRT World's Nicole Johnson explains the ties that bind them.
After the Yalta Conference, East meets West aboard an American warship in the Great Bitter Lake in the Suez Canal.
It was an extraordinary time, 1945. US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is on board the USS Murphy in Egypt's Great Bitter Lake, meeting King Abdulaziz ibn Saud.
He'd come hundreds of miles across the desert and by ship to confer with the President of the United States.
Together, they form a friendship and strategic alliance that goes on to shape the modern Middle East.
It was a simple formula. The US agreed to support the Ibn Saud ruling family and not to interfere in its ultra-conservative strand of Islam called Wahhabism. In return, Saudi Arabia would keep the oil flowing. The United States has been accused of ignoring human rights abuses in the kingdom ever since.
Oil has been the basis of their relationship. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest producer. Major US oil companies pump crude from vast reserves across the kingdom, and Saudi depends on the US military to protect those oil fields. Then September 11 happened. The 19 hijackers were all affiliated with Al-Qaeda. 15 of them were citizens of Saudi Arabia. The relationship was shaken, but survived. In May last year came the highlight of recent US-Saudi relations, an ostentatious reception for US President Donald Trump in Riyadh. He was the guest of honour for Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz. But some analysts say the visit damaged US credibility in the Middle East.
It didn't change it, nor did it strengthen it. Actually, it weakened it in the long term. Short term, because the administration, I would say, didn't know much about the Middle East, didn't have any experts on the region, didn't even have ambassadors in key countries in the region. I think it was a PR visit that was mostly beneficial to Mr. Trump and maybe his family.
With Trump's support, the Saudis were emboldened and blockaded neighbouring Qatar, accusing it of terrorism. The blockade is still in force and has divided the countries of the Gulf. Then together, President Trump and Saudi moved on to confront Iran, a mutual enemy. Saudi Arabia and the US believe Iran is a nuclear threat. This year, the US pulled out of its deal with Iran.
It seemed that under President Trump, the Saudis could do no wrong. When they kidnapped Saudi royals and held them in a Riyadh hotel, Trump tweeted he had great confidence in the king. Saudi jets have killed hundreds of civilians in Yemen, and the king's son carried out a palace coup to depose his brother. He then kidnapped the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri.
But the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul has put the US-Saudi relationship under scrutiny.
In this case, we know the Saudis were directly involved. We're still debating how highly they were involved, but there's no question that agents of the Saudi Arabian government were the ones who carried out this action.
Washington can't allow the Saudi regime to become destabilized. There's too much at stake. So it's left with a dilemma: how to balance the call for justice with the need to maintain one of the most important strategic alliances in the world. Nicole Johnston, TRT World, Washington.
Let's get more on the history of that alliance and what it means moving forward. I'm now joined by David Mack. He is a scholar at the Middle East Institute, also a former U.S. ambassador and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. Ambassador Mack, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start off with how important this strategic alliance is between the United States and Saudi Arabia. How important is it?
I'm glad you focus on the question of the importance of the alliance, because the United States relationship is based on complementary interests, overlapping interests, not identical, but overlapping. That's with regard to the stability and prosperity of the international economy. With regard, that means oil. With regard to the stability and security of the Arabian Peninsula and the waterways on all three sides of the peninsula. With regard to the common interests in fighting against terrorism, with regard to standing up to Iran and having some kind of alliance with Iran, and finally, with respect to an eventual Arab-Israel peace agreement. In all those areas, there are overlapping interests between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States.
So this is a multifaceted strategic relationship. But one of the central characters in this crisis is the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. How much of a thorn could this be in the side of the U.S.?
I think it's terribly unfortunate that both governments, the Saudi government and the U.S. government, have focused on individuals for maintaining this extremely important relationship. And they've chosen individuals who may not be the best representatives of their countries, because the personal and family interests of President Donald J. Trump, of Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and the dynastic family interests of King Salman and his youngest son, or one of his younger sons, Mohammed bin Salman, have sort of become a proxy in their thinking. The interests between the countries are important. The interests between the individuals can come and go. And frankly, it's not very important whether President Trump has a good personal relationship with the king or with his son.
One last question. The big problem here is that the United States doesn't have an ambassador in the kingdom or in Turkey. How much of this is going to be important?
That's a huge problem. We need to have a day-to-day conversation on strategic issues between the two countries, not simply an occasional conversation between people from the El Saud family and the Trump family. And I think we're getting back to that with a greater role for Secretary of State Pompeo, with the new head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Certainly, General Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, is a key player.
Ambassador Mack, thank you very much for your insight.
You're welcome, Holly John.
With such an important relationship at a crossroads, how much fallout can we realistically expect for U.S.-Saudi ties? The U.S. president himself has called this the biggest cover-up ever, and that those behind the killing should be in big trouble. Major U.S. media and political figures have pulled out of the Saudi conference dubbed Davos in the desert, and there are many here in the U.S. calling for more action, as our John Brain reports.
Jamal Khashoggi died more than 8,000 kilometers away in Istanbul, but the political and diplomatic fallout has plunged Washington into crisis. The US's relationship with Saudi Arabia is the cornerstone of its Middle East policy. Riyadh was Donald Trump's first foreign port of call on becoming president. He signed a multi-billion-dollar arms deal there, a deal he has no intention of jeopardizing.
If we don't sell it to them, they'll say, well, thank you very much, we'll buy it from Russia, or thank you very much, we'll buy it from China. That doesn't help us, not when it comes to jobs and not when it comes to our companies losing out on that work.
But Khashoggi's killing has appalled America's lawmakers. The Saudi explanation for the journalist's death has united Democrats and Republicans in condemnation.
Is there any part of this story that you accept as credible from the Saudi Arabian government?
No, and as a matter of fact, the only person on earth outside of the Saudi kingdom who appears to accept it is President Donald Trump.
In Saudi Arabia, you do not do something of this magnitude without having clearance from the top. We need to find out who that is and hold them accountable.
I know what I'm going to do. We're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia. You know, we deal with bad people all the time, but this is in our face.
The US does have a history of turning a blind eye to human rights abuses if they're carried out by a country it needs to preserve a relationship with. So why a possible rupture over the death of one man? Well, Jamal Khashoggi lived here, he had influential friends here, and he was writing for the Washington Post, one of America's most respected newspapers. And freedom of speech is one of the core values of the US Constitution. It's the First Amendment, in fact, and killing a journalist is seen as the ultimate breach of that.
And the administration is taking action. The visas of those Saudis suspected of being involved in the killing have been revoked, and other measures are expected. The president has finally run out of patience.
They had a very bad original concept. It was carried out poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups.
But the US is treading carefully. Beyond the possible economic consequences of falling out with Riyadh, Donald Trump has a bigger concern: Iran.
He's relied so much on the Saudis because he hates the Iran deal. And so basically he does not want to lose their support for, being opposed to Iran. And then the final thing is the price of oil. When those sanctions kick in November, the real hard sanctions, the price of oil is going to go up dramatically unless the Saudis increase their output.
For the US, the Khashoggi affair is an ever trickier balancing act between defending American values and protecting American interests. John Brain, TRT World, Washington.
So what does this fallout mean for each country? And is it likely to actually touch the alliance? I'm now joined by Middle East analyst Ahmed Madir for more on this. Ahmed, when you look at Saudi Arabia, especially Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, he's actually come out and announced some restructuring, especially in the country's intelligence services. But is this just King Salman having his son get his own way?
Right, it appears that way. Some of these things are superficial, trying to appease the public. There's a tremendous pressure on Saudi Arabia to change things there because of this huge embarrassment and this fallout. And, let's not forget that Saudi Arabia depends on the United States for a lot of its legitimacy. And right now, the Congress, the Senate, the White House is putting a lot of pressure on Saudi Arabia to correct what happened and to be held accountable in some way to appease the international pressure.
You talked about a lot of pressure over on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. We've seen the narrative from the U.S. sort of shift from, okay, let's wait and see, to slowly shift into, okay, this is the biggest cover-up ever. How is this going to translate?
Well, shifting back and forth. The one thing that's changing more than the Saudi story or narrative is Trump's reaction to the Saudi story. and narrative. And Trump himself is under a lot of pressure. Him and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, staked a lot of their foreign policy on Saudi Arabia, and specifically on MBS, and he's becoming a huge embarrassment, and it's providing a lot of backlash. What Trump wants to avoid is some sort of public fight that impacts oil prices and translates into higher gas prices at the pump ahead of the midterm elections. So he may be stalling here for the more severe punishment later on, but he'd rather that this whole thing goes away and business back as usual.
Okay, Ahmed Badir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The U.S. and Saudi Arabia have enjoyed a close relationship for decades, with billions of dollars in weapons deals and financial ties. But the strategic partnership could be facing a major blowback, as TRT World's Ubay Shahbanda reports.
Saudi Arabia is the United States' largest foreign military sales customer by a wide margin. Over $114 billion has either been spent or allocated by the Saudis to purchase a massive arsenal, courtesy of Uncle Sam. Defense contractors like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing stand to reap a major profit from these deals. The weapon deals include next-generation air-to-ground missiles, anti-air defense systems, and advanced warships. And Yemen has become a testing ground for much of this arsenal. The Trump administration says the amount of weapons sold to Saudi Arabia serves as an important bulwark against Iran and advances U.S. strategic interests.
But if what happened, and if the facts check out, it's something that's very bad. At the same time, they have been a very good ally of ours. They've been helping us a lot with respect to Israel. They've been funding a lot of things. I will tell you that Russia and China would love to have that military order.
But U.S. congressional leaders have already signaled that they may take unprecedented measures to stem, if not halt, the flow of weapons to the Saudis if they don't get answers on the scope of journalist Jamal Khashoggi's killing.
Multiple billions of dollars worth of training and weapons cases that could be held up by Congress over this. The most likely thing that Congress will hold up are weapons systems that relate to the war in Yemen.
The ties that bind the U.S. and the Saudi kingdom come with a major price tag. The question many are asking is, will President Trump use the leverage he has over Riyadh, or will it just be business as usual?
Well, to help put this into perspective, I'm now joined by TRT World defense analyst Ubay Shahbanda. Ubay, how do we move forward? Can there be, or will there be, any repercussions?
Money and wealth, those have been really the cornerstone of the 70-year-plus relationship between the House of Saud and the United States ever since Franklin Roosevelt had that first meeting with King Abdulaziz. And where there's money, there's power, and where there's power, there's influence. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign military sales from the United States to Saudi Arabia. No other country comes close in terms of the amount of money that is spent here in the U.S. when it comes to buying and purchasing the military. But other than that, we're looking at intelligence cooperation. We're looking at U.S. military trainers on the ground in Saudi Arabia training the Saudi military officers coming to the U.S. So this relationship has been built up in the past 70 years, not just based on mutual interest, but also based on almost a transactional relationship. We're talking about billions of dollars, and the defense industry here in the U.S. is extremely powerful, extremely influential, and we're hearing President Trump saying that, look, we can't risk the relationship with Saudi Arabia because it just means too much for the U.S. economy.
You talked about that transitional relationship, but all that sort of petrodollar surplus is actually then reinvested into not only America, but also American companies. So does Trump have the upper hand here?
And that's what's potentially so unprecedented about the situation. The killing of Jamal Khashoggi is now leading to major political repercussions here in this building right behind us on Capitol Hill. Senior congressmen, influential congressmen, senators like Lindsey Graham and Bob Corker are now saying for the first time ever, perhaps the Senate, U.S. lawmakers may put holds on major or potentially even stop entirely major weapons, major ticket items that Congress has to approve that the Saudis want from the U.S. That hasn't happened in a very, very long time. So the fact that we're now hearing lawmakers on Capitol Hill discuss this option is absolutely unprecedented and could put a major dent in the U.S.-Saudi relationship.
We're going to have to wait and see once Congress gets back in session. All right, Ubay, thank you very much for that. Good to have you on the show. Well, that's it from us here in Washington. Now, we've looked at the history of this cornerstone alliance and the killing that has put it into crisis mode. Although the death of Jamal Khashoggi has sparked outrage around the world, it's not the first test of Saudi-U.S. relations. They've weathered everything from the oil crisis back in 1973 to the fallout from 9/11. So the question is the Saudi-U.S. relationship simply too big to fail? With new developments coming out every day, one thing is for certain. This latest crisis has certainly stress tested the relationship. Thank you and goodbye from Washington.